as we see the growing adoption, you're going to see a more FOMO for Bitcoin, not only from nation states and governments and so forth, but also the regular people, especially the younger generation. They're going to wake up to it and say, wait a minute, okay, I have the US dollar, sure, but I can also grab Bitcoin, which is not being debased and can hold a more value longer term and even appreciate faster than real estate and gold and all these other things.
Hey everyone, this is the first episode of a special new series where I go country by country highlighting Latin America's digital asset ecosystem. I'm of the conviction that 2025 is going to be a huge year for crypto adoption across the region, and so the purpose of this series is to help showcase these stories to the English-speaking world. For today's episode, I talked to Tony Edward, who's a native of Guyana and host of the popular Thinking Crypto podcast. Tony and I discussed the economic instabilities Guyana faced during his childhood, the country's newfound oil wealth, and the role that crypto assets will play moving forward. I hope you enjoy. So, Tony, great to have you here.
Aaron, it's awesome to be on with you and to talk about crypto. It's Friday. It's Happy Friday. Bitcoin's back over 100,000. So it's good to be here.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's always nice to connect with a fellow podcaster and content creator. I think there's something about being in these trenches every day that's kind of unifying, I suppose. But would love for you to maybe give yourself like a quick introduction and then we can dive in.
Sure. So, hey, everybody, I'm Tony Edward, and I'm based in New York, but I grew up in Guyana, came to the States with my parents when I was around 8 years old, and grew up on the mean streets in New York. But, growing up, I've always been into technology. I was using Google when it first launched back in the 90s. I was taking apart computers and so forth. So eventually, when I ended up coming across crypto, it definitely caught my attention. But as my journey progressed about learning about Bitcoin and crypto, my childhood and my background in Guyana and understanding debasement of currency. Well, now that I understand the debasement of currency and the financial struggles my parents faced in Guyana, it really clicked as for Bitcoin's big use case as this alternative currency, also a store of value that can be used as a hedge against debasement of currency and inflation. And nowadays when people come to me and they say, "Hey, Tony, tell me about Bitcoin and crypto," I say, "Go read the Bitcoin white paper. I want you to start there. Forget about making money. Forget about the investment part. I want you to understand the ethos of this. Why was it created? And created against that hedge of to 2008 crash and the bailouts and the basement of currency. And then we can talk about the investment. But I want you to understand what the root and the genesis of this is."
Yeah, I love that as a starting point, right? It was just a very unique point in time in 2008, 2009 where the Bitcoin white paper was released, and it's one of these things where like in entrepreneurship, like people talk a lot about like you have to have a good product, you have to have a good idea, but you also have to time it right. Like a great product released at the wrong time is going to flop, right? So it's an interesting kind of experiment to think about, like what would have happened if the Bitcoin white paper would have been released in like 1998 or in 2024? Like, would it have had the same impact? So but yeah, I agree. It's a great foundation to start people off on. It's like you got to understand like the foundation of what this thing actually is before you start thinking about like how can I make money on this, basically. So let's start about talking a bit about Guyana, as you alluded to. Maybe tell us a bit about what it was like growing up in the country, and maybe talk a bit about even just maybe some of the financial struggles that you guys encountered on a daily basis, perhaps. Or maybe just give us a bit of color about like what was life like in that country.
Yeah. So Guyana is a beautiful country. It's connected to the Amazon. There's, I think, 50% or more of it that is not developed. It's like jungle, rainforest. But in the northern part, you have the development. You have the capital, the big city, Georgetown, and it's a British colony. So back in the 1700s, 1800s, folks from India, Indian descent, came to Guyana, came to Trinidad, and so forth with the British, working the plantations. And I think it was sugarcane or something like that was the big business, right? And it developed. Since then, Guyana got its independence from Great Britain, and it's struggled as a developing country. I wouldn't say it's third world, but it's not far from that. Today, it's getting a lot of development because we discovered oil. So that's driving a lot of revenue in the economy and development of the infrastructure. But when my parents were growing up, it was hard times. And part of that, of course, is the classical debasement of currency, right? You go there, here's $1,000 bill or a $20,000 bill, right? You're dealing with this hyperinflation. Now, it's not as bad as Venezuela and Argentina and some countries in Africa, right? But it's up there with currency problems. And with currency and economic problems, you have strife with the people and the government, you have some corruption and things like that. And that's part of why my parents wanted to leave the country, um, because the opportunities weren't there. Now, fast forward to 2024, things are much different because of the discovery of oil off the coast. And that's driving a lot of development. And the United States and the Guyana have a very strong relationship now. But growing up was rough, and that's why my parents, they wanted to leave, and they often tell me about stories about growing up in poverty and what it was like, and with their brothers and sisters, and the sacrifices they had to make, and going hungry sometimes, and so forth. It was to that nature. Now, I have some very faint memories of Guyana growing up, but I do recall, good times, but I remember some bad times. I remember having blackouts because the electricity infrastructure was not great, flooding and things like that. And we had our own house and everything, but just the opportunity wasn't there. The infrastructure wasn't there. So that what made us move. Now I visit Guyana like a couple of times per year. My grandparents still live there, and they still deal with the currency problem, and they all want U.S. dollars, right, or an alternative currency. Now, there are people who are waking up to Bitcoin there, where they're like, should I invest in Bitcoin? Some people ask me because they know I'm, involved in crypto. But the infrastructure for them to do that, the on ramps, is not fully there. Although I feel like it's going to start to boom as the more of the country becomes more connected on the internet. I'm seeing a lot of people with smartphones, computers now, Wi-Fi in the major places in the cities and so forth. So once the internet infrastructure is fully to par, I think we're going to see a lot of Bitcoin ATMs or exchanges participate.
Super interesting. And before we dive back into the crypto part, I'd like to maybe talk about some of this oil development, because I think it was like 2019 when oil was discovered there, and this was, I mean, if I understand correctly, this was like one of the biggest oil discoveries like of the century, really. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, in off the coast, it's offshore, right? It's in the Caribbean Sea, like underneath the whatever the underneath the seafloor. And it's been, and if I understand correctly, like it's been probably like the fastest growing oil producing country in the world since 2019, which is kind of crazy. Um, and obviously, like that generates a lot of wealth, right? Like there's a lot more investment, there's more money. There is also kind of like the resource curse, right? Where like you see a lot of
Yes.
these countries, like in Africa and stuff, where they have a lot of oil, but all the oil just gets stolen, and like the elites, get all the money, and everybody else is kind of gets nothing. Like, how is this all affecting Guyanese society right now?
So I would say overall it's a pro, because I think the government, the leadership right now is doing a good job. And because we live in the era of the internet and more media, there's more accountability being put on these people. They can't really hide because right away, if I see something's wrong, I can jump on a phone and put something on TikTok, right? And then the government doesn't, most people don't like that in the government and in the elite, because they get called out, and then people can easily organize now. In the past, they could easily bury stuff like that, right? Oh, don't believe that guy, and you couldn't. It was there was gatekeepers. You couldn't get on public, TV or radio and so forth. You had to pay money. But now everybody, decentralized media, democratized media, everybody can get on and create content and spread information. So I would say the government is doing a good job. Could they do a better job? Sure. I'm seeing a lot of infrastructure being built up, a lot of foreign investors coming in, definitely a lot of Chinese investors. I've noticed that in my visits there. And I'd say it's been a plus, and to the economy, and to the infrastructure and getting things up. I think right now they're looking to give Guyanese citizens, um, a bit of the it's what Alaska does. They give some of the oil revenue to the citizens, or they reduce the
Mm.
taxes. So there's a bit of that. Now, I think you and I both know if you do too much of that, people get comfortable with free money. They don't want to work, and they're like, "Why should I work? Just the government gives me free money." But I think they're doing this as a way to just boost the economy. But I hope they don't do it on steroids. But I would say it's been a plus. It's really put Guyana on the map. You hinted that it's been the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and relationships are being built with the United States and different governments. So definitely a plus.
Yeah, and obviously with that growth, there's more wealth being generated, and then with that wealth being generated, people are presumably, as you alluded to earlier, like trying to get out of Guyanese dollars and into perhaps something that's a bit more stable. Um, Maybe just from a high level, like has Guyana kind of gone through this cycle of kind of like IMF bailouts and restructurings and these types of things that maybe some other countries in the region have gone through, where that have kind of really like constrained their ability to like grow and really dictate the course of their economy over the last maybe like 50, 60 years or so. Is that something that's been endemic to Guyana?
Not that I am aware of. They've been it's such a small country. The population's pretty small that I think people pretty much ignore them, to be honest. Like,
Okay.
no one paid attention. Now people are paying attention. Part of the interest in Guyana that I guess in the recent history that really started booming was the undeveloped part of the country, which is untouched, right? And it there's a connection to the Amazon. So I think if they're able to build that up and get tourism, but that, you need to have the infrastructure to do that, proper uh, roadways going deeper into the areas, building resorts and things like that. And that's actually been happening. That will really help getting tourism. But I think the oil really put Guyana on the map that everyone's like, wait a minute, who has oil down in South America? And then, there's the battle between Guyana and Venezuela, and that's been going on and off for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too. Is I've just been following this like very loosely, like seeing some headlines. Is that something that's related to the oil, or is that like one of these just long-standing, like they've just been arguing about the border for centuries kind of situations?
There was some small arguments. It was really nothing, because I remember asking my parents about it, and they're like, "Yeah, we've never really had any major conflict. Was there, like, dialogue? Sure. But now with the oil and the Guyana economy booming, Venezuela's ramping up their rhetoric, and they're trying to escalate things. So, thankfully, it has not escalated to any type of conflict, but, you never know. And I think the United States, I'm not mistaken, they've been stepping in to try to help resolve some of these things as well.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, let's dive back into crypto here. Took a little detour there, but maybe talk about how did you first discover crypto, and how did maybe like what was your journey in, and maybe talk a bit about like maybe how your kind of childhood familial upbringing maybe influenced your worldview so that you were able to really understand crypto from an early point.
Sure. So I remember very vividly, me and my buddies, my friends, we usually Friday and Saturday nights would meet up, get some wings, have some beer. It would be our hangout time. So this was back in 2016. And my friend Sebastian started telling us about crypto. And of course, at first, we were all like, what? Like, what is this? It sounds like a scam. Like, why are you showing us this stuff? Right. And, we ignored him the first couple of times, and then he kept bringing it up and showing us about Bitcoin, and I think eventually Ethereum had was about to do their ICO and things like that, and eventually it did launch, and then he was making money off of this. So that's when I realized, okay, I need to pay attention. Like, how are you making money off of these things, right? um, so then I started listening, and then I went down the rabbit hole myself and started looking into Bitcoin and Ethereum and even Ripple at the time and what they were doing with XRP. um, and at first I was scared, right? Like everybody, you're like, is this, can I trust this thing? Am I going to lose all my money? But the thing that clicked for me was the technology. Once I understood the underlying technology of blockchain, I re- I really related it to file sharing on the internet because growing up in the 90s, using Napster, LimeWire, I was very familiar with that, as I'm sure many people who grew up in the 90s using the internet in the early days.
It was the good old days where you had like 10 o'clock at night, you'd start downloading it, and then like you get up early at 7 in the morning to see if it finally. It's like kid on Christmas morning. You got to run and check and see if there's presents under the tree, kind of thing. Like, did my song download?
Or you
But
got a bag of coal because it was a corrupted file that had a virus for your computer, right?
yeah, so disappointing, man. So disappointing.
Right? Yeah, but those were the days. I kinda miss those days of the internet because, there was something just charming about it. It was the earlier days, and you can maybe hack some things a bit, right? Mess around with stuff, and I love doing that with computers and all that and the internet. But, that's where it clicked for me. Wait a minute. The blockchain is a set of computers running a decentralized network, one player can't change the code. One player can't say, "Hey, this is wrong." There has to be a consensus. And when I realized that, I was like, "Oh, I get it. This is just the next layer on top of the internet." And, instead of moving data and information, we're gonna be able to move value. And Bitcoin obviously started this movement, and it fixed the double spend issue. So that was the problem before with people who tried to create internet money. How do you solve the double spend issue, right? And one person saying, "Oh, this is wrong," and no, this is right. You have that consensus network of folks, and you have the real time aspect to it, the global aspect to it. So I went down the rabbit hole, man, and I was hooked. Not only did I see an opportunity to make money, but realizing, hey, this is an opportunity for me to maybe change careers, get involved in a different way. And the reason why I was thinking that way, because in the 90s, I saw the dot com boom, but I was in high school. I couldn't participate. I didn't have the money, I didn't have the knowledge. And back then it was you had to be accredited, you had to be attached to a VC or a hedge fund. I'm an immigrant kid growing up in New York. Like how was I going to do it? My parents can't do that, right? They're just trying to work to build their lives up in the U.S. And it clicked for me. I have the opportunity now to invest in my version or as an adult of Google, of Amazon, and so forth. And I know those companies are public now, but the idea is in the early stage to get ahead of the crowd and where you can make significant returns.
I love that, and I love the kind of framing of crypto as like a financial empowerment tool, similar to what you're describing, right? I think a lot of people in crypto throw around the financial inclusion angle, and I just in one of my recent interviews, we actually talked about this subject, but it is inclusion, like yeah, but like in a lot of ways, the inclusion problems have been really addressed in many countries, specifically in Brazil. Like it's pretty easy to get a bank account, be able to transfer money, all these things. Um, but it's really like crypto as a financial empowerment mechanism where you can just access these types of things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to. And like, yeah, you might not always win, like you might lose some money sometimes,
Sure.
but you have the opportunity that you wouldn't have otherwise had in kind of in the the analog system, Web 2 system, or whatever we want to call it. So I would love to go back to Guyana again specifically, and this interview is part of a broader series where we're going around country by country, exploring crypto adoption across Latin America. And you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but would love to maybe just get a sense from you, how accessible is crypto in Guyana? Is this something that people are starting to pay attention to a bit more, given the price rises, given the fact that there's maybe a bit more wealth in the country now than there was a few years ago? Um, maybe I'd love to maybe talk a bit about, how are people, is it possible to even access using a Guyanese dollar? Are there like fiat on and off ramps, or do you have to kind of go into the peer-to-peer marketplaces and that type of thing? But would love to get some color from you just on kind of the state of adoption at the moment.
Yeah, so it's more of the peer to peer right now, because there's not too many on ramps being built, um, and because the infrastructure of the internet. And don't get me wrong, like I can go to Guyana and access Wi-Fi in the major hotels and everything, but not everyone is set up with a computer and internet at their homes. Now, like many developing countries, let's say in Africa and so forth, many people have smartphones. That is where they access the web, get information online, and so forth. So I'm seeing more of the younger crowd are paying attention. I had a cousin who asked me about Bitcoin, should I invest and so forth. And I was actually surprised that it brought it up. So I think um, there people are starting to see there's a movement behind Bitcoin and crypto, and they want to be a part of it. They're seeing other countries like El Salvador and folks are making moves. So there is an interest there, but as far as adoption, very little. Maybe next to nothing as far as merchants accepting anything. If you go to the local mall, would you see a crypto ATM? Probably not. But I think more online, peer to peer. But I think as the country continues to develop and the population, there's more demand. There's going to be someone who's going to meet that need. Maybe that's where I come in. I don't know. Right?
It's your call. It's your
Yeah,
calling.
right, exactly. Maybe I need to go set up ATMs there, that do and run a business like that. Um, but I think it will grow, because the younger folks who are more tech savvy and understand what's happening, and who may understand the idea of currency better than the older folks and what's happening, they're going to adopt it. And because it's digital, is native to them, and everybody is living in a digital world now.
Binance is the largest platform for digital asset trading, with over 250 million users around the world and over 350 trading pairs. Access best-in-class products and services for investors and advanced tools for institutional players. Liquidity matters. Security is non-negotiable. Join Binance today. Today's episode is brought to you by Morphware. Powered by hydroelectric energy from the Itaipu Dam, Morphware provides high-performance compute to run, train, and build your AI apps and agents. One of the greatest expenses when it comes to building AI applications is the compute. Morphware provides a gateway to accessible compute for AI development. Using abundant clean energy from Paraguay, NVIDIA's highest performing GPUs, and Bitcoin mining infrastructure, Morphware offers some of the most competitive prices for compute in the industry, breaking down barriers to AI so it's accessible, scalable, and ready for everyone, everywhere. Follow on X at Morphware AI and join the Telegram to be part of the community. I'm just thinking, for some of these smaller, Guyana, the population of Guyana is probably like less than 1 million people. That may or may not be accurate, but probably it's not a huge country, irrespective. But I suppose if you're an exchange, right? If you're a Binance, or you're a BitGet, or you're one of these big global exchanges, that's is it really worth your effort to go into a market that small and like set up Guyanese dollar trading pairs and that type of thing? It's probably like pretty low on the priority list, unfortunately, right? Just for it's just not a super strong business case. Not that you don't want to give those people services, but it's just from a business perspective, it's just there's resources perhaps better allocated elsewhere. And how do you think you kind of I'm sure like other smaller countries around the world face the same issue. How do you see that maybe kind of being reconciled? You think there's a chance for a clever like local entrepreneur to maybe kind of build their own brokerage, or kind of set up their own marketplaces for these types of things, where they're swapping like Guyanese dollars for USDC, or for Bitcoin, or that type of thing? Is that maybe how, like, what are kind of the first steps to really like getting this adoption going? Is maybe the crux of the question I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think the USDC route is the way. So you can, here's why, because a lot of people in Guyana, they want US dollars. I mean, I have family, right? And trust me when I tell you, they want US dollars. And there's a large population of Guyanese citizen Guyanese people that have migrated over to Canada and the United States. And there's a huge population in I would say the Northeast here, especially around New York, and like a local hotspot of the Caribbean. And there's a place called Little Guyana in Queens, New York. And
Nice.
I hear from family, I hear from other folks, when they send money back to their family and friends down there, it's in Guyana dollars, excuse me, US dollars. So folks are used to converting to US dollars and vice versa. So if you were to set up like a USDC on ramp, that would be perfect, because they would understand, oh, this is a stablecoin backed by the US dollar. Okay, I see, I'm converting my US dollars, my Guyanese dollars, excuse me, to a US backed stablecoin. Easy speed, right? It's so easy. I think that would resonate very easy, because one, the advantage, it's an English speaking country, right? British math, British English, all this stuff was taught, from the day one. So there's no language barrier, and the country is definitely, the people understand the dynamic of the US dollar, and they all want it.
Yeah, that's really fast. Yeah, it's easier to understand that, explain that to somebody, than trying to explain like what a Bitcoin is. Like, how can Bitcoin have value if it's not backed by anything? Like, how is it worth $100,000 each? Satoshi white paper, cypherpunk stuff, right? But just this idea of like, okay, it's just like a digital dollar that is kind of like on steroids, right? It's just really easy to move around. People can wrap their head around what that is, especially if they're already used to thinking in terms of, it's shocking. Like, growing up in the US, and then spending time in these other countries, you're like, wow, like people actually do like denominate stuff in dollars. Like they think
Yes.
about things in dollars, and not just Like in Brazil, we've had a pretty bad like devaluation of the real against the dollar recently, and people are just like freaking out about it. Right? It's like it used to be 5 to 1, now it's 6 to 1, and people are kind of it's like it's anyway. Won't go into that whole situation, but it's a bit messy.
Well, the same thing happens in Guyana with the Guyana dollar to US dollar. So, and I'm telling I can't remember the countless conversations I've overheard with my parents and my grandparents and different family members as, they're trying to, get as much US dollars as possible, and they talk about the conversion rate. So that's very familiar to me. And while it's not a problem for me, I'm, around it, or it's around me, where I hear it.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Like, just I mean, I grew up in northern Minnesota, and like, I literally thought the thought of thinking about something about valuing something in a different currency and trying to do the conversion in my head on the like, literally never experienced this for the first like 2.5 decades of my life. Like, it was just never the thought never even crossed my mind that this was something that you would need to do, right? So,
Right.
but then you realize like that, like most of the world actually operates like this. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
And that's why Bitcoin was created, and that's why it's as we see the growing adoption, you're going to see a more FOMO for Bitcoin, not only from nation states and governments and so forth, but also the regular people, especially the younger generation. They're going to wake up to it and say, "Wait a minute, okay, I have the U.S. dollar, sure, but I can also grab Bitcoin, which is not being debased and can hold a more value longer term and even appreciate faster than real estate and gold and all these other things."
Yeah, and that's the thing is like the US dollar is being debased, maybe not as quickly as other currencies, but it is being debased, right? Like we us living in America, we realize that. So yeah, that is the search is like how do you find like what is that pristine asset that you can put your wealth in that is going to like preserve that value and ideally even grow that value over the longer term. Um, so, on that note, I mean, would love to maybe get some just forward-thinking thoughts from you looking at 2025. Like, what are you excited about generally? I know you cover a lot of stuff on your channel. We haven't even really talked about your podcast, actually. Maybe we should probably talk about that. But you've got a really interesting podcast that you put out a show pretty much every day, doing different 10-15 minutes talking about the news of the day, what's going on. You do a lot of really interesting interviews with folks from crypto. Really good mix of interviews. It's not just kind of the same recycled crypto people, but you actually talk to like interesting, unique people in different areas and projects and things. Um, Maybe just give us the quick rundown of like what your kind of how you became like a crypto podcast mogul here, and then would love to get your thoughts on like what you're excited about for 2025 moving ahead.
Sure. So, before crypto, I wanted to build a YouTube channel. I tried many different ways. I tried vlogging. I tried doing videos of stuff I saw in New York, living in New York. And the reason being is my background is in digital marketing. So I was doing online marketing for businesses and so forth. I worked at agencies in house doing search engine optimization, paid search, social media marketing. YouTube was a different beast. It's a search engine in its own right, but the variable is the video content has to be done well, and you have to
Mm,
make sure you optimize the thumbnail, things that are not straightforward as if you were optimizing for a website for Google, where you could, you just put some keywords, title, you put some content. Video is a very different thing. So I was really trying to crack that code, right, and have some success there. And then I guess it was kind of serendipitous because as I was going through that process, crypto came along and I discovered crypto. And I was like, I want to talk about crypto. I started a YouTube channel. I wasn't expecting any for it to grow. I had a 9 to 5 job and I started talking about it. But I guess the one of the major pillars of being successful on YouTube or podcasting, you have to be passionate about what you're talking about. So that when you're not getting views or if you're not making money, you still want to do it. And I started by just wanting to talk about this thing because I was passionate about it and I want to just have a dialogue. And the two things, worked together here. They dovetailed together, and I had some success using my digital marketing skill sets, but being passionate about the technology, wanting to learn. So that's why I speak to as many people as I can in the crypto industry, even those who are not popular, they don't get a million views, but I can learn something from them and I can help share that knowledge, amplify that knowledge. And you never know, they're building maybe the next technology that's going to be the next Amazon or the next Google, right? Of this Web3 era. So that's my approach to it. And I'm super excited for 2025. Aaron, the stars are aligned here. We got TradFi here with ETFs, tokenization, and much more. On the political side, I mean, I if you told me a year ago we would have presidential candidates campaigning on crypto like RFK Jr., Donald Trump, and so forth, and all politics aside, political affiliations. Just think about that. This technology became a political issue, and then we got the most pro crypto Congress coming into office, a pro crypto president, of course, who's saying we want to make this thing the biggest thing in the United States. We're going to make the United States a leader in crypto. I mean, it's unbelievable. The stars are really aligning here for us, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And in Congress, it's going to push through legislation that's going to be balanced, protect investors, foster innovation. And then you got the haters, the people who have been anti-crypto, like Gary Gensler, getting kicked out. So I'm so excited for 2025. I think it's going to be an amazing year for crypto, a boom year. Now, I look at the crypto industry from different aspects. Price, yes, a lot of people care about price because they want to make money, and you do have to be careful there. Where are you putting your money? And there will be a blow off top in this market. Markets move in cycles. It's cyclical. Same thing with the stock market. So you have to be careful. But when you look at the development, the embrace of Wall Street and TradFi and crypto and politics, the pathway is clearing here for just the boom of this industry. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. I have two thoughts on that. I mean, there is a certain degree of like Schadenfreude, I guess, with seeing Gensler kind of getting like forced to resign. I guess for non-German speakers out there, it just means like you sort of take pleasure in somebody else's suffering, I guess. Right? But it's like it's a pretty good feel. When I got that, like when I saw that tweet or I got that breaking news email, I was like, all right, I feel pretty good about that, right? And then yeah, I mean it is crazy how like like all this stuff is just lining up, and and I think a lot about it. I've thought a lot about crypto in terms of like adoption, in terms of like, okay, what are the barriers? What are like the opposition points that remain? And I remember when I was like my first job out of college, I had some sales job that I was really terrible at. But like one of the things that they taught us, or like one of the things I learned, I always remembered, is this like bridge burning sales technique. So it's like you're trying to sell, like whatever, like a vacuum cleaner to somebody, and the way that you make the sale is like you try to burn all the escape bridges that the client has, like, oh, it's too expensive, or oh, it's not good enough, or oh, I don't really care that much about it, or it's just not priority, whatever. Like you try to kind of burn all the bridges in the pitch, right? So I think a lot about crypto in terms of adoption, in terms of like burning, like what are the main bridges that people can escape from, right? And I think like like the ESG FUD, right? That was the big thing for a couple of years there, right?
Yep.
And now that like BlackRock is launched ETFs, it's like, okay, like if BlackRock is behind this stuff, it must not be that bad for the environment, because that's been like their thing for a long time. Kind of the money laundering FUD. It's like, okay, I mean, it's sure, but it exists, but it's going to exist with every type of asset, including fiat, including real estate, whatever. All of these things that you could point to as being like, well, these are reasons why Bitcoin is bad or crypto is bad. Like they're all just kind of falling by the wayside. Like there's no, look at the Peter Schiffs of the world. Like these
Yeah.
guys, like, like there's just no, who's going to take this guy seriously anymore? Like there's just nothing
Exactly.
left.
I think I don't know if you saw what was circulating when he tweeted out, "Bitcoin will never see $100,000. Give up your dream." Right? And all these tweets are coming back to haunt him, and it's like you have no credibility anymore. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like everyone who staked their reputation on this stuff has just been totally discredited, So it's like, who is left to oppose this movement? Right. And so, yeah, so I totally agree. It's just like, wow, if you'd have said a year ago that the situation would have turned around this dramatically, like no one would have believed it. Right.
and I want to share something. It may be a bit controversial. I think, from a macro standpoint, the U.S. and a lot of these governments are making a big push towards crypto now because other financial instruments and people being able to generate wealth are failing, like bonds. The stock market, while there is a performance, it's not outperforming inflation and debasement as it used to, because there's
Hmm.
not as many companies doing IPOs. You're not seeing that gold rush era of, like what we saw in Web 1.0 and 2.0. That's kind of died down.
It's a great point.
Yeah, and part of that is AI is going to eat up a lot of the things that companies were created to do, and being built to do. They're not needed anymore. And then as we're headed to Web3 and we're becoming more decentralized, he's going to eliminate a lot of the middlemen and a lot of things that Web2 apps did because you don't need them anymore. And I think the Fed, I think world governments see this. And so there's now that's why I think BlackRock is coming in. These guys are rushing in and they're financializing these tokens, Bitcoin and whatever else, right? This is, I think, an avenue they see. Man, people can't buy houses. The real estate market is tough right now. And because of the ebbs and flows of the rate cycles, how are people, right? A lot of people, young people are like, I can't buy a house. What am I going to do? Well, there's an avenue, crypto, and now they're legitimizing it. So I think this is the vehicle. They won't come out and tell you that. This is just my thesis, by the way. I could be wrong, but when you look at the performance of other asset classes, nothing compares to crypto.
That's a great point. Yeah. And even just on the housing side, right? Like you have I mean, it's basically like to buy an entry level house now, a starter home. It's basically, it's just totally unaffordable in most parts of the country, right? Like you would need to save up for a decade just for the down payment, if you're a family or whatever.
Right. It is
So
not as easy as the boomers. Like for the boomers, oh, you can buy multiple properties. It was easy, right? Because the dollar wasn't as the base. There was a different financial, situation. And hey, get into the stock market, right? Well, those things are not performing as well now, and they're harder to attain to get to, like real estate.
well, on that point, I have one controversial, potentially thought that I'll leave you with. So uh, I think by next generation or two generations from now, like anybody who has like one Bitcoin, like people will look at people that look at somebody who has one Bitcoin the way that we look at boomers now, right? In the sense that I know I used to live in Arlington, Virginia, which was one of these places that used to be like super poor, like not like poor, but it's just like average town. And then once the federal government in the US started really building out post 9/11, all of these houses that were in Arlington for like 100K, all of a sudden they're like worth like $2 million, right? Because they're just so
Mhm.
close to Washington, D.C. So you have all these people running around that are like, oh, like I'm so rich or whatever. I'm so smart. And it's like, no, you just bought like land at a place that just happened to like appreciate dramatically because of some event that you had no control over.
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of like the entire boomer generation, right? You just happen to be born at the right time. Like you could have bought any house and it would have gone up, it would have like gone up in value during that period, right? Like all you had to do is just be in the market somehow. And I feel like, in a generation or two, the people that own like a Bitcoin are going to be like that version of, we're going to be like the boomers of today, essentially. Anyway,
On that
but
note, I've been saying this. You probably heard it in a podcast. There's some Bitcoin I'm never selling. I'm leaving it for my daughter, uh, so that she's going to be taken care of in that area at least.
the ultimate trust fund,
Yeah,
Bitcoin trust fund kids,
exactly.
right? So, uh, but yeah, but anyway, Tony, I really appreciate you having you on the show here. Yeah, like I said, it's like I've listened to you for so long, and like finally get a chance to talk to you is really cool. Would love to just give you any final thoughts, whether Guyana related or general crypto related, and how can folks find you and your podcast?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And folks can find me on YouTube, Thinking Crypto. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on X, Twitter, and all social platforms. You can follow me find me at Thinking Crypto. And some advice. Start if you this your first go around with crypto, make sure you read the Bitcoin white paper. Understand why this thing was created, what this technology is about, and be careful when you're investing. Yes, you can make money, but you can lose money because there are market cycles and there's a whole lot of stuff that's in this market, like the Haktua coin and all kinds of stuff. Be careful with meme coins. It's like a risk curve. The further out you go and the more risky it is. It's like going to the casino, throwing it on red and black. It's that type of setup. But you may want to start off with the top 3 or 5, 10 in the market cap that have been around for multiple cycles that are proven. They weren't started last week. They weren't started last night. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, XRP, and diversify. I think that's important.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, hey, listen, Tony, really appreciate you having you on the show here. Appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for watching. And we'll see you next time on Brazil Crypto Report.
Thanks, Aaron.
Hey everyone, this is the first episode of a special new series where I go country by country highlighting Latin America's digital asset ecosystem. I'm of the conviction that 2025 is going to be a huge year for crypto adoption across the region. And so the purpose of this series is to help showcase these stories to the English speaking world. For today's episode, I talked to Tony Edward, who's a native of Guyana and host of the popular Thinking Crypto podcast. Tony and I discussed the economic instabilities Guyana faced during his childhood, the country's newfound oil wealth, and the role that crypto assets will play moving forward. I hope you enjoy.